This is Will from LearnChess101.com. I'm going to go over a game I was playing a couple of nights ago, and it's one of those games that you can learn a lot from. And I'll build a little suspense here. I won't say who ended up winning, but I will say one of the players had no business winning this game, and then they ended up winning anyway. So let's get into it. So you guys know I am light, and my opponent was dark. So beginning of the game, I start out just moving out my pawn here, and my opponent does the same. I'm going to go through this intro a little bit fast here, just kind of bringing out our key components, getting a little bit set up. And you'll notice here, this is where it first starts to get a little interesting. Just still bringing everybody out. And at this point, still moving everybody out. Hold on here. Here we go. So now I decided to bring my knight out. And typically I actually don't always do this. Sometimes I like to though, just to see if perhaps my opponent might just move a piece to the wrong place and I can capitalize on that. And then right there though, I make my first mistake. The thing is you never want to leave a piece unguarded, and I do that right there. And my opponent takes one of my pawns. So at that point, of course, I move my rook just to get him out of there. And he moves his bishop right back out. So at that point, I castle. You always want to castle early on, so long as you can. It keeps your king much more safe, and of course, gives a little more protection to your rooks. So at this point, he's moving his pawn out to get rid of my knight. And now it just kind of becomes a little bit of a chase. Again, he moves his knight there, and again, I make my next mistake here. And this is called, I actually cover this in our ebook, The Chess Formula. We just called it This or That, where you put your two high-ranking pieces in a position to be captured by a pawn. And as you see that here, I have two knights. There's just nothing I can really do about it. They're going to be taken either way. So I do something interesting. I actually just kind of ignore it, and I just move my queen just to kind of move forward. It happened. Just kind of counting my losses, and I'm ready to just keep moving forward with the game. So then he takes that knight to the right side of the board. Of course, I recapture his pawn, and at this point he brings his knight, and I'm kind of just playing a little defense here, just trying to keep him from moving any more of my king. My king's a little bit exposed right here. Then, of course, captures my knight back. And then I actually I moved my bishop out there. And again, he's kind of moving it. So again, now I move my bishop down there. At this point, I'm just looking to get my king a little bit of protection. Just kind of getting myself reset up. So here we go. And that's where I first get to go in. I finally capture one of his pawns. And I start at least making a couple offensive moves here. His knight right there, of course, is blocking the bishop from capturing my own. And then he moves his pawn, of course, to get my bishop out of there. And then I get another one of his pawns. So at that point now, right now, he only has a +1 lead on me. I have 3 of his pawns. He only has 1 of mine. But of course, he has 2 of my knights, while I only have 1. So then again, he takes another pawn of mine, and of course he's able to capture my rook if I don't move it. So of course I do. So then finally my opponent decides to castle. We had a lot going on in the game so far. And at that point, this is something I always do when there's a bishop right here. I always move my own just to capture them or have them capture mine, just because I never like to have my king boxed in like that. So he moves his bishop out, and then I move mine there just to give my king a little more protection. If you can see the arrow, I have a little bit of an escape pathway in case anything happens over here. And then he goes and takes another one of my pawns. Again, I'm just not a very good game on my part so far. I'm leaving a lot of pieces open to capture without being able to capture any of my opponents in return. You always want to make sure that all your pieces are protected so long as you can. I'm breaking that cardinal sin many times in this game. So at that point, I'm just, the game, I'm down by about 3 points based on how much the pieces are worth. And I decide just to kind of bring my rook out just because it's a little bit more uncommon. And I just kind of want to get something going here. So at that point, again, he's kind of chasing my rook a little bit. And I move my rook back. And then again, of course, he moves his bishop back. And at this point, I'm kind of just moving my pawns up again. I'm just trying to get something reestablished here. And he's starting to move his pawns down towards me. And now I'm finally trying to get my queen in a position to actually be able to do something. So far, I've kind of just had my queen just sitting back there, just trying to prevent myself from losing too many pieces here. And again, my opponent went to move his pawn, and then I'm finally in a position to capture one of his. And of course, my opponent can't capture my queen. Excuse me, my opponent's queen can't capture my bishop as it's protected by my own queen. Sometimes your opponent, they won't notice that, and it's just very impulsively, they'll just go for the bishop, and then of course you get the queen. I'm hoping that happens, but it doesn't. They just kind of move their queen out of the way. So at this point, I'm just moving my rook there just to kind of block that pawn from getting any further and potentially being promoted to a queen. And in doing that, I make another mistake, and my opponent's able to capture my rook with their bishop. And again, I can't even capture their bishop back. So right after that, I move my pawn up so I can at least block the bishop in so he can't escape this time. If he was to move right here where my pawn is, my other pawn would capture him. So then, of course, he just kind of moves his pawn out of the way. And now you can see he's working again towards getting his pawn promoted to a queen. So at this point, again, I move my other rook back to just prevent that pawn from getting promoted. Because right now, my opponent's up by about +7 based on the chess piece values. And at this point now, I'm bringing reinforcements in. I'm bringing my bishop down to protect my rook as well and make sure that one spot's a little extra guarded in case my opponent's able to get his piece right there. And of course, I'm also making sure if he moves his knight that I can just capture his his bishop instead. So now my opponent brings his rook down there. I'm not quite sure what he was doing when he did that. And at this point, I'm just moving him out of the way. If he was to get him promoted, my bishop would capture the pawn, and then my rook would capture his rook in return. He doesn't do that, though. And at that point, I just move my own bishop into position, blocking it. And now it's a little less of it's a lower ranking piece compared to the rook. So you definitely want that piece there blocking it as opposed to the rook. So now at this point, I move my queen in. And this is where the game gets interesting. I'm playing a terrible game so far. My opponent probably assumes the game's won. And what's interesting, though, this is what captures my attention, is if you notice right here, if this knight's not there, and I'm able to move the knight, and now I'm able to get my queen where this bishop is, it's actually checkmate. Because my queen's protected by the rook, and if my queen's here, the only place the king can move, my queen would be able to capture it. So now, while my opponent's so focused on getting his pawn promoted, I'm looking to figure out a way, perhaps with these pawns near my queen, to get his rook to move, just kind of hoping he's just so fixated on the pawn, he doesn't notice this happening. So I've been strategizing, how can I get that knight to move? And the very next move, I'm not even kidding, you can see he moves his knight automatically. I imagine just assuming that, I'm guessing what he wanted was his bishop just to kind of get my queen to move, not realizing that I could just attack his bishop. And so right then and there, boom, I capture his bishop and it's checkmate. So the big thing to take away from this match, there's a couple key things. Number one, always keep your pieces guarded. Quite frankly, I was not playing very well at all in this match. Really until the very end of it, which involved a little bit just my opponent making one little mistake. What goes to lesson 2 is that those little mistakes usually make the difference in the game. So you see, I made a lot of mistakes early on, But fortunately, they never actually hurt me. Then my opponent made one bad move, and despite the fact that he, quite frankly, was outplaying me the whole time, all that really matters is whether or not you achieve checkmate. And so, even though I made many more mistakes, I was still able to win the game. So I'd always like showing this game just because I know sometimes, especially online, people I played, they tend to resign if they're losing by a little bit. And the thing is, don't ever do that because, number one, you might still win. Number two, if nothing else, it's a challenge and a learning opportunity to continue to develop your game. So that's today's match. As I said, it was a pretty fun one to watch just because it was a very unexpected victory. I do encourage you, go make sure you check out our ebook, The Chess Formula, which teaches the top tactics in chess. It's some of those moves that teaches you all how to look for them and prevent them from happening to you. So again, I'm Will with LearnChess101.com. Thank you for watching this video, and if you have any thoughts on the game, be sure to leave them in the comments.